The Redefined podcast is part of the Winmate Give podcast network.
Here it is, gang. Another episode of the Redefined podcast. My name's Eric Hatch, and my beautiful, wonderful, handsome guest today is my brother from another mother, the right hand, the alpha to my omega, the yin to my yang, the Yoda to my Chewbacca. I don't know anything about Star Wars, but that's how I trigger you right away. I love it. Robby Trefethren, otherwise known as Robby T. Hey, buddy. It's fun to have you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Those are the nicest adjectives I've heard you say about me in a minute, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably be Chewbacca, and you can be Yoda, because Chewbacca is just like space Sasquatch, right?
Let's not go there. You're done. You're cut off. We're done with this conversation.
Do you want to know how you trigger a Star Wars nerd? Is any sort of the comments that'll come out of my mouth. That's exactly how you trigger them.
Yeah, you know how to push those buttons. That's for sure.
It's so fun. Robby T, you're a legend in the real estate industry. In fact, I was on a podcast earlier today. A nice gal named Trisha Turner out of Houston. And she was talking about how she came out to our mastermind a couple of years ago in Big Sky, Montana, and how it was great and how she's read our book. And then she said, well, I was coaching with Robby T. Robby T was coaching our ISAs. And then she's like, that guy is the best coach for ISAs and lead converters in the country. I'm like, no. He's like prestige worldwide. He's not just USA famous. This guy's coached Canadians. So worldwide at this point. Robby, how did all this come to be? How did you get to be like the voice of lead conversion? Because what you do is really special.
Man, there's a lot of different paths we could go down with it. And first off, I appreciate it. And I think it's true. It's really weird that I got to run in circles with some of the best producing teams and names in all of real estate and get to help coach and train them. It's super sweet. Man, I think it all comes from being different. Honestly, it's probably the biggest thing. First off, I love Star Wars, as we've alluded to earlier, and I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. But honestly, when everybody was running left, I started running right. And I think the foundation of everything that I coach and train on is so different than what was being espoused and discussed in this industry. Just a simple example of this is when you get into the game of real estate, you're given a script book and you're told, here are the things you need to memorize. And the things
I think I actually gave you a script book because you were my ISA. I'm like, hey, people told me that you should say this. Right.
100% you did. Yep. You gave me that script book. I've used that story many times. And then the part I didn't tell you at first is I threw that thing right away. I threw it out the window because what I realized
Robby, our first office didn't have windows. So I know you're lying.
Maybe it was a trap. Maybe I lit it on fire. Figuratively. Maybe.
Yeah, nonetheless.
What I realized, and actually my experience, if we can go back to maybe my time in politics for a second to tie this all together, is before I worked in real estate, I worked in the one thing that's less popular than salespeople, and that's political campaigns. I was known as what's called a field organizer. So my whole job was to knock doors, text or call and have conversations with leads to identify, one, who they plan on voting for, and then two, persuade people to vote for our candidates. Number three, get out the vote. And what was really funny was, Eric, the mistake you made with me, they made as well. They said, here's the book on why people should vote for our candidates. And simply put, when I went up to people's doorsteps and said, hey, I'm with blank and blank political party, and I tried selling them on my candidate, man, I got called every name in the book. I had guns pointed at me. I had threats. I had people slamming the doors in my faces. And I did that.
You're a kid. You're a 22-year-old kid at this point, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was kind. It wasn't like I was being mean. But what I realized was it wasn't them at all. It was my approach. And it's simply, what I realized is that people didn't want to be sold. They wanted to be heard, understood, and valued. And I was trying to sell my candidate. So I happened to read at that time a book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's a chapter that's all about
Stephen Covey. Is that right?
Stephen Covey. Yep. The chapter I love is seek, first understand, then to be understood. And I took that whole script book, I threw it out the window, and I basically said, what I'm going to do instead is go up to people's doorsteps and say, hey, Eric, I'm with blank and blank political party. And man, I just wanted to find out what matters to you this election. And then next thing, you know, Eric would say something very surface level, like, man, I don't really know. Because they're like, who's this joker on my doorstep? Who's this bearded guy? Get him out of here. Like,
I think you had a chin strap at that point, Robby. It wasn't a full beard. It was just the chin strap.
Let's not talk about that. Let's keep that secret. That's in the archives of Facebook somewhere.
Were you wearing your three-piece suit too? Because
I probably wasn't, but I should have been. Maybe that would have worked better.
I was looking back. So as we record this, it's like the 7-year anniversary of us doing our very first coaching summit together. It was 2016, and we brought like 35 people to our office in Fargo, North Dakota. And Robby has pictures of him up in front of the room at a whiteboard, and he just threw his pen the entire time, just up and down, was throwing his pen so nervously, wearing a 3-piece suit, because Robby was confident in what he was saying, but he wasn't confident in who he was yet.
Amen. Yep.
And so it was like, literally, I've watched you grow up in front of my eyes as somebody who always had the brilliance, but now you found the breath that goes with it. You figured out how to deliver that message really well, how people can hear it, understand it, regurgitate it. You knew how to be great for you, but now you figured out how to be great for others. So back to your story, but I will continue to make fun of you as we go along with this. And now you dress like you're partially homeless. So it's a very interesting contradiction of 3-piece suit to homeless Bobby.
I've gone full 180. So really what I learned was I went up to there and I'd say, hey, what matters to you this election? People would give some like surface level answer, like, man, I don't really know. Maybe schools or something. We got some kids, like some surface level answer like that to deflect. And I'd be like, okay, well, cool. Tell me about that. What about schools matter to you? And what I found, Eric, was almost always when I showed that renewed interest, that second and third time, what happened was shortly my problem was no longer getting screamed at, yelled at, getting called names. My problem was, man, these people would talk for 15, 20, 30 minutes. People wouldn't shut up anymore. And so I went from them wanting to shut me up to they wouldn't shut up, and they would just go on and on and on. And when I got into the real estate game, same thing happened. You did the same thing to me because we didn't know any better. You didn't know any better.
I just did what I thought everybody else was supposed to do, even though that's not what I was doing for my own personal business.
That's what was so hilarious about it. And I was like, man, I was going to throw this thing away. And what I did was I started calling leads, and I say, hey, I saw that you were checking out some homes on our websites. Were you just looking for fun, or anything about making a move sometime soon? And again, they would almost always give some surface level answer, like, I was just checking things out, looking for fun. And I would acknowledge them, like, okay, got it. Well, what had you looking for fun? And again, the same concept of what I was doing in campaigns. And the next thing you know, the conversations, again, people wouldn't shut up. I was learning everything about people. And again, it just reiterated, people didn't want to be sold. And I think that's what everyone's afraid of. Like at the core dynamic, to really kind of draw this all together, you ask, why am I successful? It's because I'm teaching an approach that goes so counter to all the cultural media or any of the books out there. Most of the books about sales are say the script, here's the magic words. NLP was a huge thing, linguistic programming essentially. And these types of things were the big things. I'm like, no, just shut up. Ask really great questions, be a kind human. And the crazy thing is, I think I had more success in the role than anyone ever has had. I don't know if anyone will beat me. And I don't say that out of ego. It simply was I combined my work ethic, which was pretty darn solid.
Yeah, tenacious for sure.
With a new strategy that very few people adapted to. And I'm proud to say what's kind of cool is it's becoming more mainstream. It's becoming more normal. And being empathetic and listening is displacing some of the old school mythologies. So I think that's to answer your question, how I became who I am today and had success.
So the highlight reel is this. You were an ISA for a couple of years, an inside sales agent.
Yep.
There are 100,000 phone calls, 10,000 conversations, about 1,000 closings or 1,000 appointments, which was it?
Yeah, 1,000 appointments and just under 500 closings.
Yeah. Which is an incredibly high conversion rate too, through all of that. Now you're coaching the top lead converters and ISAs in the country. You obviously understand team dynamics in a huge sort of way. But I have a fishing question. My kids and I do this fishing for compliments game, which is so funny to watch my 7-year-old go, "Hey dad," and he takes his imaginary fishing pole and throws it at me and reels it back in. And I'll have to be like, "You're a very handsome young man." And so I'll fish for compliments. So I want to ask you, and this is a fish for a compliment here, and then I'm gonna let you fish right back. What's like the greatest lesson I've taught you over the years, and then I'll tell you the greatest lesson that you've taught me.
Can I go with 2? Can I do 2? Is that okay?
Yeah, I'll take 3.
Okay, not giving you 3. You don't deserve 3, but I'll give you 2. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first is giving. One of the greatest things that you've always done from the very beginning is really impress upon me that we have a responsibility to do good outside good just for ourselves or our internal family. And I think that's something that I don't know, based off of my upbringing, I would have been generous like I am. I don't know if I would have. So generosity was something that infected me in a really positive way. The second thing is the irony of this whole approach that I teach about sales. I was reading and studying it theoretically from books, like I had said. But the irony is you were one of the people that I studied firsthand because you were the one doing it firsthand. And when I watched you interact with your clients, because when we used to be in the game together, or even interacting with our agents and others, you were the one that always took this type of approach first. So I get to kind of teach because I've codified the living heck out of a lot of it. But a lot of the proof of it in the beginning was just simply you had already been doing it. So I don't know if I've told you that before.
Oh, thanks for that, man. I said I was going to share mine for you, but I'll just leave it. I felt good with what you said. I said this to you privately and publicly and everything else, but like your obsession and I wrote down the word obsessed. Like if somebody said, describe Robby T, I think your obsession, your hyper focus, your diligence, not just to get good, but to get great. You don't get to see that very often. And I know I want to dive in a moment and learn the broken record that you've been playing in your head for so long, because you've had to overcome a lot of the narratives the world has given you and things that you've given you. But you've been obsessed with creating more opportunities for others and for your family. And that if I could take 10% of what you have and put it into everybody else, we'd be in a pretty powerful place. So I love the obsession and the hyper focus. And I've told you this before, you're not the most talented person that I've ever met. And I don't mean that as an like talent is just like a natural God gifted you and bequeathed you with this stuff. And instead, you're the most gritty and intentional. And I'll bet on that over talent any day of the week.
I take that as a huge compliment. If anything, I know I was gifted with like
I think I'm going to title this "Not Talented at All," Robby T.
How a piece of crap becomes a piece of gold. I didn't something. Yeah.
No, I'm just going to say not talented at all.
Not talent. Okay. All right.
All right. So, Robby, obviously, you have found great success. You're now, I think, 33 years old, but you never seem to really remember your age. Yeah. And where you've climbed and what you've done is pretty powerful and inspirational.
Yeah.
Where you've come from, well, that's a different story. So I want to sit back as somebody who knows a bit of your story, but I want to learn a lot more. My goal is to peel back the layers of the onion a little bit and figure out what has happened in your life, internally, externally, that has led you to think the way in which you do. Because if someone's listening right now, they're like, hey, I could really value not taking talent, but taking drive and letting that be the leader of success. I think that'd be pretty awesome. So I want to learn about the stories you've been telling yourself and the stories that you were told for too many years.
Yeah. So I think let's start here. I grew up in Fargo, not far from where Eric did. And the way I grew up, there's some dominant themes. I think it's the easiest way to describe it. On my dad's side of the family, for example, you're just as likely, if not more likely, to sell drugs, use drug, overdose on drugs, go to jail than you are to graduate from high school. So there's
did you know that when you were growing up, Robby? Were you cognizantly aware?
I was not a good kid, man. Like through high school, I don't know how I graduated, frankly. Outside, I started high school bowling, and actually, I think the only reason I got enough good grace to graduate high school is I started high school bowling. No joke, or as the kids would say, no cap. I really think that was the reason. But no, I was very aware of it. I didn't know that there was anything different. Maybe.
Did you know you had a choice, or did you think that your destiny was set for you already?
I think in the beginning I did. And then really what ended up happening was I met Lauren, and I realized, like, man, if I want to keep her, because I married way out of my league, like many levels up. I was like, man, if I want to keep this gal, I got to level up my life quite a bit. Because again, I barely graduated high school.
Isn't it nice that some girls just want to fix people? Like, he got a chance because Lauren's like, oh, he's not talented at all.
He's broken and she can fix it. And she was the first person to kind of believe in that. I think that was two things happened. One, when I graduated high school, one of the things that really irked me was my high school counselor basically told me I wouldn't amount to anything. And I won't say his name, but I know, dude, he wasn't logically wrong. I'll say that very clearly.
Yeah. What context led him to say you're not going to amount to anything?
I wanted to go to NDSU and go to architecture school because I loved drafting in high school. That was my thing. I loved those classes. And NDSU's, North Dakota State University's architecture program is pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's one of the top in the country.
It's one of the top in the country. I think it's at that time top 10 or 20. And I think he was trying to be realistic that you got to probably go start somewhere else and earn your way to get there. And maybe I heard it incorrectly, but I think probably what happened was his communication of it was pretty poor. That's not going to happen, and that you're far better off going to, he called it like a state school, or here it's an NDSCS,
like a tech school, right?
Tech school. Yep. So that kind of irked me a little bit.
Was he a realist? Was he a pessimist? Obviously, it didn't sit well with you.
I think he was probably familiar with my family because the same things happened with my brothers, actually, because they went to the school. My brothers are 4 and 5 years younger. Yeah. So similar things happened. And all three of us have graduated college and went on and are doing things. But I think, to answer your question, I think he was probably a combination of a pessimist and maybe a realist. But in some ways.
That obviously was a gift for you when he said that, right?
It was a gift that I didn't realize was a gift until I got a couple wins, honestly. Okay. It's one of those things that you believe. It's like, man, I come from this crap already. I'm surrounded by it because that's who I am. That's been my family for so long. There's not many examples outside of it. And then here is somebody that you think is supposed to be a supporter and believer in you. And he's basically saying, like, nah, man, that's not going to happen.
So how could he have said that? Let's take 17-year-old Robby. Imagine the chin strap, everybody. Let's take 17-year-old Robby, bowling ball in one hand, and goes into his guidance counselor's office and says, hey, what should I be doing with my life? What should he have said? Because I think a lot of us, we have powerful voices and people are coming to us and we see the reality of the path they're going down based on the choices that they're currently making. What's a better framing for that so that the next little Robby T of the world doesn't have to receive it the same way?
I think the first thing you should try to find and do is find something where I think almost all humans are good at something. Even criminals and people that do things, they're almost always good at something. And for me, I think if he would have said, man, I've seen you put a lot of intention and effort into starting high school bowling and a lot of work, because that, as much of it's a joke, man, that was a lot of driving, building relationships. If you want to talk about influence, getting schools to do anything is a nightmare.
Yeah.
Let alone allowing them to start a school sport that they have to sanction, allow you to use the school's name. Like, it's not an easy thing to go and do. And I think if you would have potentially asked some questions about that, shown some interest, and said, man, are you going to start bringing that same intensity to architecture school? Right. And I think if he would have something like that and help me make those mental attachments of, dude, you've had some success here. If you want to go and win in life, you got to bring that same intensity, which I ultimately ended up doing after I took a year off from between college and high school and worked some blue collar jobs and realized that was not the life for me. But I think that would have been a lot more impactful.
Yeah. My guess is he had the right intention behind it, but the delivery, I mean, that could crush some people who don't have the resilience that you do.
It crushed me. I took a year off from school, again, worked blue collar jobs.
You were a security guard, right?
Well, no. So I don't, you've never heard the story, actually. So 2008, this is the worst job market on the face of the earth, right? 2008. And I'm the new forklift driver at my dad's warehouse. My dad's a truck driver. And they basically didn't have hours to give. So I'd go weeks without anything. And I'd worked at a bowling alley off and on and was still doing that. And they had not given me any hours for like 3 weeks. I basically thought my job was over, right? I got nothing for 3 weeks. And then on Christmas Eve, they're like, hey man, you got to come into work. I'm like, no, I'm not coming in on Christmas Eve with 1 day notice. It's just not happening. And I quit. But then I got another forklift driving job sorting pallets, which, like, if there's anything more mind numbing than sorting pallets on a forklift, there isn't. But it was actually one of those things that kind of woke me up and drove me, because that place was a propane powered forklift with no ventilation. And this is January, February. February, you can't just open the garage doors because it's negative 20 degrees out. So I'm working in these warehouses and I see these other guys doing the same thing that are 40, 50. I'm like, first off, they're getting poisoned, like legitimately getting poisoned. And my headaches would just pound and pound and pound. And I eventually quit and was planning on moving out of Fargo. And that's where I ended up meeting my future wife at my going away party and one of my friends. And then I decided to stick around, and that's where we're at.
You grew up in a house with Robert and Tammy, who I know, good people. Your dad also makes a mean bit of pizza with sauerkraut on it. Folks, have you ever had sauerkraut on a pizza? It's pretty great, actually.
Best pizza out.
Growing up in that house had its challenges and its advantages. There were things that were right and things that were wrong with the school system, with your family, with your own dialogues. What stories were you telling yourself as a kid, Robby?
So I think there's probably 2 or 3 big things that, and I honestly hadn't fully unpacked all of this until recently. I'm sure we'll get to that a little bit later. My mom would sometimes be angry. Her go-to, she's very emotional, in the best of ways. I've learned from my mom to be like, the greatest thing I learned from her is she's never afraid of running towards emotion. Somebody's hurting, she's the emotional firefighter to be there and hug you and hold you and help you. But there was also some anger at times and frustrations. And just from my upbringing, one of the stories that I ended up taking was, man, I wasn't worthy of unconditional love. And if you're someone who's ever struggled with that internal message of you're not worthy of unconditional love, simply put, what happens is you try to prove to the world you're worthy of unconditional love. And you try to do that in so many different ways, whether it's through business or through relationships or attention or whatever it may be. There's a lot of different ways. Or frankly, the other coping mechanism I've seen people do is you try to drown that message out through addiction. So you're literally just trying to silence a story in some way, shape, or form. And just because of the way my life at the time, the big message I felt like I wasn't worthy of unconditional love. The second thing is my dad lost his dad at a very young age. I believe it was when he was 12, give or take. He was very young.
Do you remember your grandpa much?
No, no, my dad was 12.
Oh, okay.
My dad lost his dad when he was 12. So
okay.
imagine, you know, for the listeners, here's my grandma, and there's 5 siblings, 5 kids, and now there's no dad. So not only are you already just probably barely scraping by financially, now you've lost your husband. He had cancer. He went quickly. There's a lot of stories there that I'll save for private conversations. But very frankly, I think the easiest way to put from what I've observed is it created this narrative like the world's out to get you. And I don't blame any of them for thinking that. If I lost my dad that young, something so tragic and horrifying, and he was the heartbeat of the family, God, that really causes you to turn on the world. I mean, that's very evident in my family that.
Is it fair to say there's a victim mindset?
Yeah. I think the way I would describe it is the world is always out to get you. Yeah. Something's out to get you. Someone's going to screw you. Something's going to happen. Something bad's going to happen. So it very close to the victim mindset, but maybe even a next step further where that not just I'm going to lose, but someone else is going to screw me.
I mean, you've lost before you started with that.
100%. Yeah,
I know there's some sort of principle and I can't seem to find it. Somebody hopefully posts on the comments and says this is what it's called. But man, I can't empathize with that because I've never had that viewpoint. I wasn't surrounded by people who thought that way. Man, that really effed you up, Robby.
It's tough, man. It's a really tough. It's a sad way to see the world, honestly, is the way I would describe it. I think from what I know, Eric, you've had some tough things happen to you, but the women that surrounded you were optimists from what I've seen.
Yeah. You know, I would always say my mom, who died of cancer when I was 21, and she fought it for 5 years until she lost her battle. There were people who were glass half full and glass half empty. And Betty Hatch was just always glad to have a glass. And I mean, not just optimistic, but like freaking find the sunshine in the rainstorm kind of people, you know, just on a different kind of level. And yet here you are coming from, I mean, like you were richer than me in terms of having 2 parents, and you were richer than me in terms of, I mean, your brothers and the amount of food that the Treff boys consume. Maybe I retract that because you guys are like black holes, but nonetheless,
dude, bro, we were huge fans, absolutely huge fans of all you can eat buffets. That's all I got to say. My brothers, just for the viewers, one was an offensive lineman in college football, and one was a defensive lineman. So they were big boys. I'm just like this 5'11" little normal guy, and then they're huge.
Yeah. Those Treff boys are built different. But I say this because, like, I don't know if I noticed this before, Robby. Like, we can oftentimes talk about the wealth we had or didn't have, or the parents we had or didn't have, but that freaking mindset that's happening in your house. Yeah. Not shame. You know, it's easy for us to blame our parents, but our parents are byproducts of the environment that they came from too. So like, like where do you place that blame? Where do you unpack that blame? And it's not about blaming, it's about understanding. And I had none of that. This world's out to get you mentality. I thought, honestly, I thought I was rich. I thought I was rich because I had one pair of shoes that weren't Payless. I did. I thought I was rich.
Yeah.
Betty Hatch worked hard enough so that I could have Reebok pumps. I bought Nike pumps instead, Robby. That's before your time. The shoes weighed 9 pounds each, but I just wanted to look cool. And I wore all Kmart clothes. And then I had a pair of expensive shoes thinking that I was all of a sudden, I had arrived.
Yeah.
Like I was in a mindset where we were going to do anything to think that we had a chance. But you, Robby, you had this narrative that the world's out to get you.
So you have this intersection of the world's out to get me. And again, I think that the foundation of that is when you have tragic things happen like it did, where someone's ripped away at such a young age, like it almost flings you into that mindset. I had unconditional love questions that were maybe from my upbringing, also maybe just my own internal things. I don't know. But it honestly led to probably the third biggest thing, was probably the worst part, which is I couldn't trust other people. All of that intersected to how can I trust other people?
Because they're out to get you, right?
They're out to get you. So what that meant was I kept everything in, all of it. I dealt with everything myself. And of course, what that it leads is when you're just trapping all this stuff in, it makes you sick. You just hold it all in. Or
was 18-year-old Robby miserable?
Lost for sure.
Okay.
Very lost. So I graduated school at 17, turned 18 a few weeks later. I took my year off. That year off between 18. When I was 19, I started to finally make progress on things. We can get to that maybe in a minute. But that year off, oh gosh, I had no identity. Confidence was nil. And I always lacked confidence. One of the things that also kind of messed with me was I grew up on the road with my dad. He's a truck driver. So we were gone a lot. So where most kids are spending time with their friends or family in the neighborhood, like my kids are right now as we speak, learning social skills, learning how to engage with people, be competitive, just the normal stuff you learn playing on the block. I was the kid that was on the road with my dad all the time. So I didn't get exposure to those social skills. And going to school for me was really, I remember being extremely scared of it and awkward. So I didn't have the relationships. I didn't have those skills. But again, I always try to look at like, what was the pro of all that? I got exposed to see people working extremely hard. I was around people that didn't look like me all the time because my dad would have to hire people to work, day laborers, and these are people from all over the earth. And I got exposed, and I got to see work ethic, and I got to see my dad's work ethic. My dad is the hardest working person I know, bar none. Nobody touches it. So I got to see that all firsthand for years. And that's when you talked earlier about have no talent, my talent is that I will outwork your ass all day long. And I got to see that. I was the one that saw my dad, and soon it was me carrying boxes and carrying more than anybody else. And when people would quit and take lunches, I'd laugh and I'd keep carrying boxes.
You're like the David Goggins of moving.
Moving
trucking
furniture. Yeah. That's honestly what it was like. And it's because my dad was the David Goggins of it. Because he wanted to get the job.
Is that why you swear so much?
100%. Where if you think about this, most, again, 5, 7-year-olds, you're out, you're playing with your friends and you're learning you can't do that. I'm around guys that said every dang word you can think of. Like, bro, this is PG of me.
Yeah, you haven't sworn yet, I don't think. I mean, I'm too numb to it at this point. But, and it's okay if you do, man, because be authentically you.
That's just who I am. But I grew up around that. Like, that was my natural, that's what I've been around and around my family. Like, if you're saying the F word, as long as I'm not saying F you, and even then, like, we say that joking around. Like, that's what I grew up with.
Yeah.
It was just like there's pros and cons to it. But the con was school was tough, man. Friendships were tough for me. I was not normal. So.
It's always weird to talk about seepage, right? You hear the word seepage. There's no really great thoughts that come to mind.
Really curious where this is going.
Now, these stories that you told yourself that you're not worthy of unconditional love, that the world's out to get you, that you have a lack of trust, these stories have seeped their way into your adulthood, no matter how much you have fought it, no matter how much therapy you've done, no matter how much you've grown as a man and a husband and a partner and all these other things. What are some ways in which this seeps in today? And how do you identify it and fight it? Because Robby, I can, as you talk about like this world's out to get you, I play back our 10-year history. And I'm like, oh, that's why Robby was so like hard to deal with that. And that's why you were stuck in a sense. And I'm sure you can take my issues too and, hold up a mirror, but like I can identify some of those things that have come up in our 10-year relationship. But how are these things seeping in? How do you identify them and how do you work on them?
Probably the biggest one professionally was I wouldn't talk about me. Like I would keep that. I was guarded. I think that's probably some way. I'm sure you would use that to describe me. I think I'm much less so than I used to be, but I would not go there. I would keep all that in, everything in. So I think that was one of the big ways it came through. It honestly comes through in really random moments, triggers. Getting fired from a coaching client is a trigger that the world taught to get me, that I can't trust other people.
Let's go there for a moment because you and I were fired by a coaching client recently, and people that we loved and still love, right? But you and I both spiraled.
Yeah, it was it was tough because that wasn't even a coaching client. It was darn near some of our greatest friends in the game. And it was just, and it's not that they did anything wrong. It definitely, that's a part of it. So it comes through.
You and I told ourselves the story that this was a forever thing, and we failed to see that, listen, we're a chapter. And I say this, man, and you've heard me talk about this before, is I always say that I want to be a chapter in somebody else's book, that's my real calling in life, is to be a chapter. But man, if it isn't true that I want to be the whole effing story. And there's so much ego on that, dude. Like even hearing me say that, I'm like, Eric, you idiot. And yet when I'm in it, it's like, oh, I want to do more. I want to be the guy. And like, Robby, you went from never being the guy to now you're the guy. And so much, like, you're the guy in so many situations where people are like, yeah, he's the one. Does that make rejection harder?
I don't know how to answer that. I think rejection sucks no matter what. I think what I'll just simply say about all of this is, no matter all the work I do, all the stories I tell myself, the reality is that I had essentially 18 years of this is how it is, and longer than that, honestly, more like 28, 30 years of that's how my mind works. Maybe being the guy creates this almost like false bravado. Maybe that's kind of painful in some ways. I know where my mind went when you were asking that question is when you had said the ego piece is I had a massive ego. And the fun thing about your ego is your ego says you don't have an ego. And I think I'm extremely confident now. I will say this to anyone, that there is not a better person, especially in the real estate space, that has mastered how to have really great conversations with people that don't know you than me. That is my niche. And I think that is one of the greatest things that I'm world-class at, and I've worked really, really hard at it. My ego, though, started telling me for a while, hasn't for a long time, that I was better than other people and that I maybe deserve more. And that's where things get really gross, because your ego is just trying to protect yourself. That's all it was. It was a defense mechanism. Was for me anyways. So really what I learned from it was I've actually, that kind of going full circle on this, I've realized that I was probably pursuing being world class because I wanted that reputation to fill that hole, frankly. And then I got there. I was like, this isn't doing anything for me. I'm making really great money, best money, more than most people. I'm really financially secure. And I'm at the top of my game. But something's still missing. And that's where it was. These stories, man, these were prevalent. These stories were in my mind still. I was still telling myself that.
So you had the money, the fame, the power, all of that, but
I was empty.
The fact that you still felt like you weren't worthy of unconditional love and that the world was out to get you, that you didn't trust people, it was all an empty vessel. Yeah.
Yep. And it took Lauren telling me, like, dude, you gotta really explore some things. You're not, like, she called me on many blind spots. And at first I was like, no, life's good. We're rich, right? We got money, get over it. We're good to go. But I was blind to it.
Yeah.
And basically it took me probably really 3 to 6 months of really intense. And I still have to think about it consistently. But I had to start having a conversation with a counselor who helped me explore and do some EMDR to explore these stories. I found these, the only reason, as simple as these sounds, a lot of people, I think if you were to know me, like, oh God, all that makes a lot of sense. But I didn't know this stuff. I wasn't able to articulate that these were stories that I was living by probably until 6 months ago, 9 months ago, maybe a year ago. Fully. And what I've realized is it took me being open-minded, going into counseling, and I just started to identify that these were some dominant narratives that infected my life and were around every corner. It was a source of my anxiety and fears. And I don't want to say that I'm over it today, because it's always going to be a part of it, 100%. But that voice isn't loud anymore. That voice, I know I'm worthy of unconditional love. I know I can trust other people, and the world is good and is on my side. And it was through counseling that I was able to discover the fictitious stories I was telling myself. And then it was through doing the work of creating new narratives, of literally telling myself and looking for, and I am a big believer of, it's like almost subconscious programming. And I was programmed in ways that caused me to see the world in some really messed up ways. And I've had to do a lot of additional work to revert that, to start changing it. So when I see the world, and don't get me wrong, there's things that happen that still trigger me. I'm human. But man, the reaction that I have is a shadow of what it used to be. So
that's some progress, bud. One of the stories you told yourself is that the world is out to get you.
Yeah.
And that's the story you told yourself when you were at the bottom.
100%.
The other side of that coin is when you're on top. Don't you think that's when the world is actually out to get you? At least that isn't that when, like, people don't punch down. I think people punch up.
It's really interesting. I used to think like the concept of being on top or like being the best mattered so much to me. And there were some pros to that. But I think I've realized like none of those things matter if I'm not a kick-ass dad when I walk out of this room. If I'm not a really incredible husband to Lauren. And I think what this has all caused is it's really caused me to be much more holistic about how I view being on top. I thought that being on top was having financial wealth, being the guy. And what I've realized is if I had none of that money and nobody knew who I was, who cares? And it's letting go of that attachment of that. Do those things matter? No, they don't. What's really ironic about it is I actually feel more compelled and more energized to share the lessons and thoughts that are in my head than I've ever felt before, without fear. Every time I would go and do things, it was always for me, or I was living in fear in some way, shape, or form. And now I get to go do it without that. And it's so refreshing to not be stuck like that, because it's so heavy, it's so gross. And then of course you project it out and you take it out on other people. So,
you know, you had said that one of the lessons you learned from me, at least when I was fishing for compliments, is you learned a lesson of generosity. And I think you were maybe speaking of giving of our finances and maybe giving of our time in some regard, but you're giving of your talent. And even though I declare you as not talented at all, you are giving in such a way of your wisdom and your experiences, and the higher you climb, the more people you can pull up. And so I pray that, and you've had conversations with me in the last few months of like, hey man, I'm comfortable now financially. Like I don't need to put my foot on the gas pedal anymore. And in my mind, I'm thinking that's bullshit, Robby. Because the faster you go, the higher you climb, the more people you pull up with you. And I think that's your call here in life, is to take all of these experiences, and it only matters when you have a great household. It only matters when you're good in your mind. But when you're good on those things, my gosh, the greatness that will happen through you. If the world's out to get you, Robby, you're out to get people to a better place in the world. Like you said, you go left when everybody else goes right. If everybody else is going to be self-preserving, you're going to go and you're going to give relentlessly to other people. Like, keep going left, man. It is the thing for you. And so that requires a healthy home. That requires a healthy mind. But dude, I'm going to slap you across that bearded face of yours if I hear you say like, oh, I'm good and I'm comfortable now. Because that's not what God's calling you to do, man.
No, and I think I had to kind of pull it all together when I started unpacking and getting healthier with those messages. It really causes you to just reevaluate everything. And I think that's where I've been. And what I've realized is my comfort was I went from needing that the finances or the impact to, man, I want to do that. And those are two.
Those were not validators.
Similar.
Those were gifts you were giving to other people, right?
Exactly. And my mind has transitioned from I need it to, man, I want to give it. I want to give all my crap away for free because I know the good it does for others and for the world. And that gives me energy. What happened when I figured out my mental stories was I do think that business was one of my vehicles of fulfilling an internal void. And frankly, it's very normal in business, right? Most business people that are really, really successful are psychopaths or they have addictions. It is an addiction. They're drowning something out. It's why you can see, I won't say any, names, but a former president who had everything on the face of the earth, but you could tell was just internally empty from things. And you can have everything and have nothing. And I think for me, I'm just so glad that Lauren had the audacity, like, dude, you need to wake the hell up to all this. And she drew a line saying, like, our relationship's going to have to change, which is the only thing I think I've seen people change in one of two ways, either because there's massive amount of pain coming, or tiny little changes over time. And I think I've kind of done both, but in that case, that came from, man, the amount of pain that I wanted to avoid and not go through, that was heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. And I'm just, the real hero in all this was her. It was her having the audacity to and the courage. And you've heard me say this, I think she's one of the most courageous people I know. To say, hey man, and call you on your crap.
Well, although I am sad that I don't get to be the hero of this story, I am so glad that you have Lauren in your life, because she's a pretty tremendous gift, and I know you make her better as well. Robby, I'm proud of you for not the accomplishments that you've achieved and the relentlessness that you've had. I'm proud of you for the maturation of finding value in the things that really matter. And now that you understand that those are healthy, your ability to give back to the world is that much greater. And so it's going to be really fun to see you shine. Folks, you need to follow Robby T on Instagram. He's at Real Robby. That's Robby with a Y. Real Robby T on Instagram. He is my partner. He is one of my closest friends. He is somehow my child and my brother and my nemesis all at the same time. I don't know how this works, but I'm super, super grateful for you, Robby.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me come on, man. And you keep doing good in this. I think you're pulling out stories that people need to hear.
Thanks, man. Folks, if you want to keep listening, you got to subscribe. Okay. The Redefine podcast, subscribe it to whatever you're listening on, and we will make sure to keep bringing you value of that gross inside stuff that makes the beautiful outside for everybody else. So on behalf of my partner, Robby T, my name's Eric Hatch, and we will catch you guys on the flippity flip.
Peace, y'all.